On the last episode of the Keepsake box. As Ron was approaching, I asked him if Mom would approve of me wearing pants and having my hair down. "Just let me worry about that," he said. Ron stood behind me and adjusted my collar. He moved my hair aside and started kissing my neck. I stood there, frozen in place. Ron put his hands under my shirt and rubbed my upper body. He whispered in my ear, "There are a lot of things that your mom won't understand. I'll deal with her." He turned me around and kissed me, just as he had the night before. That time, I knew what to do without having to be instructed. He rubbed my body, also as he had the night before. But feeling his hands on my exposed skin gave me a completely different sensation. Ron pulled away from me and looked squarely into my eyes. "This is our little secret, right?" I nodded to indicate that it was our secret and said, "Yes, Daddy." "It's very simple," he said. "You take care of me and I'll take care of you. Understand?" I repeated my previous affirmation. "Yes, Daddy." "Glad we're on the same page," he said. Ron smiled and walked towards the door. "Let's watch a movie," he said. I nodded and told him that I would be out soon. I retrieved a t-shirt and a skirt from my drawer. "Looks like you'll need some pants for around the house," said Ron. Ron exited, leaving me to replay the entire situation in my head. I knew that things were far less innocent than I had originally maintained. It was wrong, and I felt guilty. But I also felt good. Additionally, cooperating with Ron had its perks. He had basically said that in so many words. I went back to my justification process. We weren't doing anything that wrong. He was just preparing me for future interactions with boys. I told myself that Ron was just looking out for me, just like when he bought me jeans and got my hair done. In truth, he was buying my silence. But the sad truth is, my self-esteem was so low that he could have silenced me for free. Chapter 10, New Life. Narrated by Shandora Warren. I awoke the next morning with an extra pep in my step. I completed my morning routine, got dressed, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a completely different person than I had days prior. I imagined walking into school and seeing people do double takes like they did in the movies. I felt good about the way I looked, but I knew better than to let my mind travel too far. I felt good about myself on the night of the dance too, and that obviously hadn't ended well. I looked at myself closely and studied my facial features. Truth be told, I wasn't ugly at all. I was actually quite attractive. But I struggled to come to terms with that idea. I didn't want to feel too confident because I didn't want to give anyone a reason to shoot me down. As usual, I found it easier to just stay out of the way. So I formulated a plan. The plan was to act exactly as I always did at school. I didn't want to look like I was too impressed by my new look or like I thought too much of myself. I thought it would backfire against me if I looked too confident. Thinking about it now, it's crazy that I even thought it out to that degree. But then again, I've always cared what people thought. I was just very good at hiding that fact. I exited my bedroom and waited for Ron to chauffeur me to school. He walked out of his bedroom and I felt butterflies in my stomach. My feelings for Ron had certainly changed. I wanted him to say that I looked pretty, and he didn't disappoint. Ron showered me with compliments and they were all well received. We got into Ron's truck. The ride to school was filled with laughter and idle chatter. Ron made me feel comfortable. Even though he was an adult, I was able to talk to him like he was a friend. He knew all the right things to say and do, but those types of people always do. We arrived at my school. Tasha was standing out front as usual, but that day she was accompanied by Sean, the boy from the dance. They were standing in our designated spot, and I was instantaneously annoyed by that. They looked at each other as if they were madly in love. If not for my situation with Ron, I would have been horribly jealous. I walked towards them, making sure to look as normal as possible. "Hey, Tasha," I said. Tasha turned around with a huge smile on her face. Her smile turned into shock as she assessed the situation. Sean walked away, leaving me alone with Tasha. "Oh my gosh," Tasha exclaimed. "You're wearing jeans. Your hair." I smiled shyly and tried to play coy. "Yeah," I said. "We picked up some things this weekend." I didn't want to look too excited, so I changed the conversation. "So, you and Sean look very comfortable," I said. That was really all she needed. Tasha started talking about how she and Sean had exchanged numbers and talked all weekend. She told me that he had admitted to having a crush on her all school year, and she went on and on about how excited she was. I was annoyed by that as well. Honestly, I know I should have been happy for her, but I wasn't. My mind quickly flashed back to my experience at the dance. It seemed that Tasha had no idea what had happened to me. She was so caught up with Sean that she hadn't even noticed that I left early. I knew she was having fun, but I felt that she had let me down. She failed to be there for me when I needed her the most. We went into the cafeteria for breakfast. Tasha talked seemingly endlessly about the details of her weekend conversations with Sean. I was very much annoyed by the whole thing. The words that came out of my mouth weren't planned. I'm still not entirely sure why I said them. I think I just wanted to let Tasha know that she wasn't the only one that had something going on. "I gotta tell you something," I said. "You have to promise not to say anything." She promised that she wouldn't, and I proceeded to tell her that Ron and I had been messing around. I made sure to tell her that there was no sex involved, but I described our encounters in great detail. Tasha looked shocked. I hoped she was jealous, but she wasn't. "That's not okay," said Tasha. "Oh, hush," I said. "You're such a kid." Tasha looked extremely bothered by the news that she had been given, but it was too late. I couldn't take it back. The bell rang. We went our separate ways without further discussing the situation. Midway through my first class, I was told that I was needed in the counselor's office. I wasn't entirely surprised. Our counselor, Miss Scott, was heavily involved with all of her students. I assumed that she wanted to discuss the fact that I would be moving at the end of the school year. I walked in with my usual pleasant disposition, but when I saw Miss Scott's facial expression, I knew something had to be wrong. I sat down in the hard wooden chair that was strategically placed directly in front of Miss Scott. "We need to have a conversation," she said. "Is everything all right at home?" Before I could respond, Miss Scott told me that she had received a report that I was being touched by my stepfather. My mouth fell agape, but I was powerless to change my facial expression. I was genuinely shocked, not because it wasn't true, but because I was surprised that Tasha had shared the news. Tasha and I were the holders of each other's secrets. Years prior, we'd made a pact to never tell anyone what we talked about. I was hurt and angry that she had broken that pact, especially with everything that was at stake. I was terrified of what would happen if the truth was exposed. But most of all, I was feeling angry and vindictive. I thought of a lie more quickly than I was comfortable with. "Was this Tasha?" I asked. "She's very concerned about you," said Miss Scott. "Please don't listen to anything Tasha says," I said. I went on to tell her that I had caught Tasha in a compromised situation with a boy after the dance on Friday. I told Miss Scott that I had confided in my stepdad, who called Tasha's parents as a result. I told her that Tasha promised that Ron and I would both pay for what we had done, and that her assertion was obviously in retaliation. "I can't believe she'd take it this far," I said. "That doesn't really sound like Tasha," said Miss Scott. "Does it sound like me?" I asked. Miss Scott admitted that Tasha's claim didn't really seem to mesh with what she expected of me. Now that I'm thinking about it, I did see her dancing with that boy all night. That's perfect, I thought. I had forgotten that Miss Scott was a chaperone at the dance. That was him, I exclaimed. Miss Scott paused momentarily. I could tell that she was pondering what I was saying. Listen, said Miss Scott. I believe what you're saying, but I'm required to contact Child Protective Services. They'll have to investigate the matter. Again, I thought quickly. My stepdad is a preacher, I said. This kind of thing can ruin his life forever. And my mom is having a difficult pregnancy. I don't want to put anything extra on her. Miss Scott sat for another moment before speaking. Yeah, your mom works with my husband. He mentioned that she has left on several occasions because of pregnancy-related complications. I really don't want to put anything extra on her. Listen, girls can be very catty. It would behoove you to choose better friends in the future. I nodded and told her that I had definitely learned my lesson. I had learned a lesson, but not the one that was intended. Miss Scott flashed a warm smile. That was the moment that I knew I had won her over. Go on back to class and remember what I told you, she said. I smiled back and left her office before any additional questions could be asked. Even though it was a short walk back to class, I wrestled through 3 complete thoughts. 1. I was happy that we lived in a small area. People are more considerate of people they know, and everyone knew everyone in my hometown. 2. Ron was right. No one could be trusted with our secrets. If I couldn't trust Tasha, I couldn't trust anyone. 3. Mom claimed to be working all the time, but Miss Scott said that she had been sent home early several times for pregnancy-related complications. Mom never came home early. I'm not sure what I thought was going on with her, but I knew something wasn't right. Mom was obviously hiding something. I walked to my destination, fortunate that Tasha and I didn't have any classes together. The rest of class was a blur. I spent the remaining time thinking of how I could avoid Tasha for the rest of my life. I knew many people would have been ready to kill her, but that just wasn't me. I wasn't confrontational. It was easier for me to avoid situations altogether. Besides, I knew Tasha was only doing what she thought was right. She probably thought I'd get sent back to Grandma's and not have to change schools. I wasn't really upset with her, but I knew our relationship had to change. It would be difficult for me to avoid sharing information with Tasha, but I couldn't trust her. That was a fact that was evidenced by my meeting with Miss Scott. So because I couldn't trust myself to withhold information from Tasha, I had to avoid her. But more than anything, I had to pretend that it was her fault. Lunch was usually the point in time when I reconnected with Tasha. I saw her walking towards me and I went into go mode. I couldn't show any signs of weakness. I expected Tasha to be remorseful, saddened even. Instead, she coldly said, I did the right thing. I was overcome with anger. I respected Tasha for doing what she thought was right, but I still expected her to be sorry for the betrayal. For the first time ever, I really disliked Tasha. She didn't know how it was for people like me. At the time, I felt that I finally found someone who was willing to give me the attention I wanted, and she was trying to take that away from me. In my mind, I told myself that Tasha was selfish and didn't want me to experience the type of happiness that she had with Sean. I told Tasha that she was jealous because she wanted Ron to give her some of the attention that he was giving to me. After an exchange of verbal jabs, Tasha paused and looked at me. You're pathetic, she said. She told me that she felt sorry for me and she walked away. I hadn't ever considered myself to be of a confrontational nature, but I wanted to argue with her. I was extremely upset that she walked away, taking away her opportunity to verbally annihilate her. I stood there fuming and wanting to follow her. Instead, I went on to the cafeteria and pretended that our interaction hadn't ever happened. I got my lunch and sat at the table alone. A few moments later, Sean came over and asked if I had seen Tasha. I told him that I hadn't, as I didn't want to discuss anything related to her. I expected Sean to leave quickly. Instead, he sat and talked to me. I can only assume that his decision to stay was based on his assumption that Tasha would be joining us soon. Sean was funny. I saw what Tasha liked in him. We laughed about an assortment of things. As we were talking, I saw Tasha walking into the cafeteria. There was nothing going on between me and Sean, but I was very much aware of how my behavior would be interpreted by Tasha. I leaned in very closely and touched Sean's arm as we laughed. I saw the anger in Tasha's face, and I was hoping that she would confront me, but she didn't. She simply turned and walked away. Sean's back was facing Tasha, and he never saw her. I knew it was wrong, but I liked the fact that she was bothered. I was grateful that I had gotten the opportunity to hurt her like her words had hurt me. I pretended not to see her and continued talking to Sean. The rest of the day went off without a hitch. I felt a little bad about my interaction with Tasha, but my day was so successful otherwise that I didn't allow myself to feed into what I had going on with her. Over the course of the day, I received many compliments about my hair and clothes. I was on top of the world. I didn't even feel uncomfortable when I caught Toya Boone looking at me. I felt good, and I didn't think anything could bring me down. I completed my day and went outside to wait for Ron, just as I did every other day. Unassuming of anything around me, I was surprised and delighted to be approached by a boy. He introduced himself to me. His name was Monty. Monty told me that I looked nice. I offered my thanks and attempted not to look nervous. I didn't know Monty personally, but Tasha and I always talked about how cute he was. He was all the things that I talked about when I described my type, if you can have a type at 12 years old. Monty was light-skinned with wavy hair and light brown eyes. He was what I now consider to be pretty on paper. Pretty on paper is a phenomenon where you have a predetermined set of physical attributes that seemingly equate to the perfect person in your mind. If you were to write them down on a piece of paper, the statistical probability that they would be attractive should be very high. But sometimes you see those same attributes on two different people, and they don't necessarily work for both. As Grandma would say, their face just falls different. That's how Monty was. He had all of the desired traits, but they fell a little weird on his face. While looking at him directly, he looked slightly like a baby monkey, but he was pretty on paper. He had all the right attributes, and he was in the 8th grade. That fact alone pushed his desirability up a few notches. Monty and I chatted for a little while. I was surprised that I was able to give off the semblance of being comfortable. I found that I was funny and witty, something that I hadn't ever realized prior to that point. We talked about random nothingness, but I was happy. Monty made me smile. When Ron arrived, I said goodbye to Monty and walked towards the truck. As I approached, I noticed that Ron didn't look happy. He actually looked quite annoyed. It was my deepest hope that Miss Scott hadn't decided to contact Child Protective Services after all. I decided to fill him out. I got into the truck like everything was fine. "How was school?" he asked. I told him it was great, and I excitedly told him about the compliments I had received. Ron let me go on, occasionally inserting a head nod. When we arrived home, I went into my bedroom to change clothes before starting dinner. Immediately after I started to undress, Ron walked into my bedroom, without knocking, of course. He was holding a bag. I smiled at the prospect of receiving new things. I walked towards Ron, prepared to kiss him as a sign of my appreciation. But instead of kissing me, Ron dropped the bag and pushed me onto the bed. I was simultaneously shocked and confused. I didn't understand his behavior. Ron grabbed a belt from my dresser and started swinging wildly. Some of his licks hit me. Others hit the bed and the air. He was so angry, and I didn't understand why. I cowered in the corner at the far end of the bed. Ron struggled to reach me, and I could tell that he was becoming angrier with each missed swing. When he realized that his beating was somewhat ineffective, Ron pulled me by the legs, positioning me closer to him. Before I could think, he straddled me, putting one leg on either side of my body. Ron held my arms down against the bed. At that point, I was looking up at him. I could feel his sweat dripping onto my face. It fell into my eyes and intermingled with the salt of my tears. "Don't you ever let me see you smiling at a boy like that," he screamed. I was astonished. I couldn't believe that my conversation with Monty had been the catalyst for Ron's violent outburst. "Do you hear me?" he said. He screamed so loudly that I jumped. "Yes, sir," I said. "Yes, what?" he screamed. Without thinking, I said, "Yes, Daddy." Ron stood up and relieved the pressure from my arms and stomach. My body was incredibly sore. As I stood, I realized that I had multiple welts that were bleeding. I was nervous and shaking. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there, still partially undressed. After the success of my school day, I was right back to being an injured spirit. Ron picked up the bag that he had dropped onto the floor. He dumped some clothing onto the bed and started walking towards the door. "Put those pants on," he said. He told me that he wouldn't want Mom to see my legs and find out that he had to beat me for being too grown. And with that, he walked out. Ron doubled back and opened the door. He told me to clean myself up and to get ready to make dinner. I did as I was told. I went into my bathroom and used the ointment that Mom had left me on the first day of my first spanking. The ointment and I had become fast friends. I realized that I had gone through an entire tube in the few months that we had been living there, but that was life. I looked through the items that Ron had thrown onto the bed. There was an assortment of sweatpants and t-shirts. I threw on one of each and went into the kitchen to make dinner. While cooking, I thought about the events of that day. Just that quickly, the day had gone from being the absolute best to being the absolute worst. Ron came into the kitchen. He stood behind me and draped his arms around my shoulders. He apologized for the beating and told me that it was hard for him to see me smiling at another guy. He's jealous, I thought. A part of me felt special that he couldn't stand the thought of someone else having my attention. As an adult, I now know that he was controlling me and controlling the situation. But back then, I just knew that no one had ever made me feel like they cared that much. Love and anger were very much intertwined in my mind, and I didn't understand that love shouldn't hurt. I think I interpreted Ron's propensity to be possessive and his willingness to do things for me as love. That mindset definitely followed me throughout my life. Ron told me that he would make it up to me by taking me shopping that weekend. In fact, he agreed to take me to get my hair done every Saturday. That was enough to make me forget all about his indiscretions. Mom came home and we started our normal routines. I finished dinner and made plates for everyone. I checked for and found fast food bags in Mom's car. I was so annoyed with her. I watched Mom pretend to get sick while eating, and I watched Ron rush to her side. I boiled on the inside, knowing that she was manipulating Ron for attention that he should have been giving to me. I developed a new routine at school as well. Monty and I started talking every day. We never really said it, but I think it was understood that he was my boyfriend. He carried my books and walked me to class. I was always sure to say goodbye to him before going out to wait for Ron. I couldn't handle another jealous fit. After Mom and Ron were asleep, I would pull out the secret phone that Grandma had given to me. Grandma was aware that Mom and Ron had taken my phone, and she gave me that one in case there was an emergency. It was one of those clear phones that lit up when it was ringing. There was a phone jack behind my bed, and I had my own phone line. I kept the ringer off, but I could see it lighting up when Monty was calling. I wonder how Grandma would feel if she knew I was using the phone she gave me to be too grown. Many people didn't understand the point of having a separate phone line in a bedroom, but that's the way it had always been. Tasha and I used to talk so much that Grandma had gotten a separate line to avoid us tying up her line. When we moved in with Ron, Mom had done the same thing. I guess she assumed that Tasha and I would be talking even more since I would be moving into another school district. She had no idea how wrong she was. Monty and I would talk for hours. On a few occasions, I awakened in the middle of the night and realized that I had fallen asleep with the phone still pressed to my ear. I knew I had to be more careful. I couldn't afford to get caught. It's true what they say. Extremely strict parents breed sneaky children. I thought about Grandma a lot during those times. I was one of those sneaky fast girls that she talked about. I liked Monty. But more than anything, I liked how I looked with Monty. I wrote his name all over my notebooks. Of course, Ron saw some of my handiwork and delivered the beating of a lifetime. The beatings were always followed by apologies and purchases, and they weren't ever effective. They served no purpose other than me finding new ways to outsmart Ron once I was caught. That was our new normal. Ron and I spent every Saturday together. We went to breakfast and I got my hair done afterwards. Although I initially felt weird about Sharon, I really started to like her. I learned that she was 19 and lived in an apartment downtown. I was impressed by her. She was so well put together for a girl of that age. Sharon was inquisitive, but she talked to me as if we were friends. I missed the girl talk that Tasha and I used to have, and Sharon filled that void. She didn't tell me a lot about herself, but she allowed me to openly talk about things, and I liked that. I needed that. There wasn't anyone else that I could talk to about boys. Sharon wasn't just my hairstylist, she became my friend. Sharon talked to me on my level. Often, she said the same things that Mom and Grandma said about boys, but she expressed her opinions in a different manner. Mom and Grandma always made conversations feel like accusations. While Mom and Grandma said it was stupid to fall into the trap that was set by most boys, Sharon told me to recognize my value and not to let boys treat me in a way that was less than what I deserved. She did make me feel stupid for the feelings that most girls my age had. I took in what Sharon was saying, but I didn't think she really understood. Girls like me didn't have the same options as girls like Sharon. I didn't get the impression that she had to work hard to make any guy see her worth. I didn't look like Sharon, and I didn't have her confidence. Nonetheless, she was a welcome change to my routine. After getting my hair done and occasionally shopping, Ron and I would usually cuddle on the couch until it was time for me to cook dinner. We'd kiss and he'd tell me how much he loved me. I really felt as if I was Ron's girlfriend, and that was just fine with me. I liked Monty, but I knew I wouldn't ever be able to see him outside of school. Besides, the school year was coming to an end, and I would be changing schools the upcoming year. I knew it was pointless to put a lot of care into him. Even if not for my impending relocation, Monty would be going to high school the next year. He wouldn't be thinking about a middle school girl. At any rate, I didn't think Ron would ever let me have him anyway, or any other boy for that matter. The school year ended in June, and I said my goodbyes to Monty. I decided that I would also say goodbye to my comfort. Going to another school would give me an opportunity to start over. When I walked out that day, I left my old school and my old life. I had the tools to completely change my image, and I decided to capitalize on that. Just as I was about to go outside to wait for Ron, I saw Tasha running towards me. I didn't know what she would say, but I certainly didn't expect what happened. Tasha gave me a tight hug. She told me that she missed me. I expressed the same sentiments to her, and I was being truthful. Tasha apologized and told me that she had only done what she thought was right. I was fully aware of that fact, and I told her so. I asked about her relationship with Sean. She told me that they were in a good place and I was relieved. While I had wanted to hurt Tasha at the time, I was glad that I hadn't caused any lasting damage to our friendship or her situation with Sean. She walked me outside and we talked until Ron arrived. Tasha didn't ask about the minutiae of my situation with Ron, but I could tell she wanted to. I knew Tasha, and I could see the concern in her expression. Instead of asking, she hugged me and told me to take care of myself. We both vowed to keep in touch. I was happy that we were friends again, but I didn't think we would be talking much. My life consisted of chores, beatings, and Ron. I couldn't fathom the thought of talking to Tasha about any of those things. So much had changed in the short time that we had been estranged. My life was completely different. Tasha and I hugged one final time. I walked away to start my new life. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.